So before we start the lesson proper, I just want to talk real quick about the philosophy of the method that we're going to do here. Now, in most fracturing cases, we're going to start with our object. We'll fracture it, and then there you go. We end up with a bunch of unique pieces. And that's fine. It works well. But, you know, the more pieces that we want, the more memory it's going to take up. So if I want to make thousands of these pieces, lots of little smaller ones, it's just going to take up way more memory. Now, the nice thing is that sometimes when we have man-made objects in particular, architectural things like this, they might be made up of many self-similar parts. So they might have many windows, you know, the same looking window many times, the same looking wall many times, the same looking columns many times. So what we end up doing is that we can actually just fracture one of these things and then take that resulting fracture and use it repeatedly. So in something like this, it'll look like that. Now that's not to say that the building has to look the same all over the place. It can still have different materials here and there. It could still have a dirtier brick texture towards the street and a nicer one higher up. I mean, that doesn't matter. It's just the geometry that's going to be simulated and kept in memory. Those are the things that we can take advantage of this for. So yes, having less memory is great, and that's what we get to do here. If let's say I start from a building that's this size, I could add 2 floors to it, and it won't really take up any more memory. It might take a moment to calculate this up front, and if you want to sim more pieces, I mean, your CPU still has to answer for that ultimately, but we'll still be able to get way more pieces into the sim. You know, especially by the time you think of like entire city blocks worth of buildings that might be getting destroyed at one time. The ability to be able to reuse pieces and reuse pieces and reuse pieces, and then, you know, change the materials on them to make them look like different buildings is super powerful. And it even pays off in other ways too. I mean, the time it takes to fracture it is way smaller, because the literal time I have to wait to fracture is just to fracture one instance of each thing, rather than wait for the entire building to go through the shredder and hope that it even comes out right on the other side. I mean, I have one that I just did here a minute ago of this size building, and it has an error. You know, it has some weird errors, and I don't really know what caused it. I mean, the Boolean works great, you know, the actual fracturing algorithm in here, but sometimes it can mess up. And I don't really necessarily know that I want to spend a lot of time debugging this by rerunning the entire building through a fracture over and over again. Whereas if that had happened in our example, let's say on just the wall, I could just say, well, we'll change some settings quickly. Does the problem go away? It did? Okay, good enough. Use that version of it, and then use it everywhere. So you get to iterate faster. You get to have more pieces. You get to just generally have more artistic control. It just becomes easier to say, oh, well, for these kinds of walls in the front, I'm going to slice them down the middle like I'm doing here. So it looks like there's multiple layers of material. I can just do whatever arbitrary treatment I want to the idea of that one unique part, and then it'll immediately propagate whatever I did to everything else. We'll have some more tricks that we'll talk about in terms of constraints and better hiding the reuse of these pieces. But at the end of the day, you know, a little bit of setup, you know, obviously it's easier to just throw the whole building into the RBD material fracture and hoping for the best. But when we put in just a little bit of time to set up our instance fracturing setup here, we're gonna get to enjoy all that stuff that I just talked about. So let's do it.